Tim, thank you for being here.
Thank you for doing this, and I appreciate the National Association of Broadcasters. I also want to say I appreciate the President's leadership on this, and Secretary Sebelius. Thank you. This is clearly an issue that, working with my Senate colleagues, with Grace and the Congress too, a series of hearings we've held under the committee that I chair, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation on Energy and Commerce. It has become a passion for Republicans and Democrats to work on this. There really is, it's not even, I wouldn't even call it bipartisan, it's nonpartisan, in part because we recognize the areas of mental health, mental illness touch all of our lives. I think I'm the only practicing mental health provider in federal government, elected federal government. Not only in my many years working as a psychologist, but also currently in the Navy at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center at Bethesda, where I work on a TBI PTSD unit. And it's clear that despite our best efforts, mental health issues should not be a cause, but it is. And it's unfortunate, it's our shameful secret that we still don't want to talk about it, even though I'm sure every member of Congress is 1 or 2 degrees separated from their own or some family member who is dealing with this issue. As the Secretary pointed out, 1 in 5, 1 in 4 in their lifetime will have some diagnosable problem. And look at not only the tragedies we see that happen with these episodes of violence, but note, 38,000 suicides a year in this country. Over 750,000, over 750,000 attempts at suicide. It really is the #1 cause of accidental death in America. There's also a note that when we look at, as people pointed out too, the length of time between first symptoms of psychosis and the time that a person first gets their treatment, 110 weeks, over 2 years, is a delay not only because we lack trained providers, but also because of the stigma that people feel and people's lack of awareness of what the symptoms mean. We spend about $110 billion a year on healthcare, we think, but I'm pleased that the Office of Management and Budget is working with us and the Government Accountability Office to do a nationwide inventory of where we spend our money. I don't think anybody's ever done this. So I'm actually excited, and I believe, Madam Secretary, I invite you to come back and talk to our committee about this, because this is one of the things, it'll actually be very friendly, because we all want to find out. I promise you that. I'll tell certain members they have to go out and get a cup of coffee. Because it is one we recognize, wow, if we look at the money we're spending and how we can spend it wiser, we can actually probably save a heck of a lot of money. When I have found out in my discussions, for example, with Pamela Hyde, all the areas that we're into, Department of Labor, in where we spend it in jails, where we spend it in transportation, and how much is spent in cubicles in Washington as opposed to getting into the doctor's office, it's a concern. And I'm pleased that my colleague, my ranking member, Diana DeGette of Colorado, is also quite passionate about this. We all are. But notice some of the differences. We have gone from about 500,000 psychiatric beds in the 1950s to 40,000 now. And I know in Pennsylvania, a few decades ago, we had 20 psychiatric hospitals and 8 prisons. Now we have 8 hospitals and 20 prisons. Half of the women in prisons have diagnosed with mental illness, 20% of the men. And that is not the place for treatment. Neither is homelessness a place for treatment. We know the characteristics. But here's some incredibly good news that's just come out too. Just announced in the July 17th issue of Nature magazine. We know that the pituitary is associated with chemicals in the brain that are associated with anxiety and depression. They've identified a site of a CRF1, a chemical that if we can now move towards other pharmaceuticals that deal with this chemical and block its use function, in a sense that we can come up with some real cures for depression. We also are getting better on biomarkers, and the President's call for research into brain is phenomenal. But we've got some weaknesses. A study that came out last December said the VA hospital, only about 10% of veterans who come in for PTSD get appropriate care. Only about 10%. We're spending a lot of money. We're spending well, but we have to spend wisely. As Grace said about schools, we also have to make sure that what we're doing there is having well-trained people in the school and in the community to go to. I know some 10 years ago when I wrote a book called The Angry Child, at that time dealing with the same issues, and sometimes I think we are not that much farther ahead in terms of getting clinicians in the field, but we certainly have come away on research, which tells us the good news: mental illness is diagnosable and it is treatable. But the stigmas we have to overcome is making sure that there's not federal barriers such as HIPAA laws or the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. We have to be working to make sure parents can be informed. But in the areas of the media, we have to stop politicians referring to those with mental illness as evil or as monsters. And as a friend of mine who is a producer over in CBS, I call her every time I see one of the shows she works on. I says, I don't think you got that one right. Because whether it's movies or comedians or TV shows that mock those with mental illness, call them crazy and lunatics and all the other derogatory terms, as the president pointed out during his White House speech, we wouldn't tolerate that for any other disease entity. And it's time we did the same thing with mental illness. So I'm encouraged, and by the National Association of Broadcasters, thank you all for the work you're doing this. This is phenomenal. But let's make sure we keep this dialogue going so people know they should not just be not be afraid to get help, but to continue to seek that help because we will help them get better. Thank you so much.